On the banks of the Ohio River, in a small town called Point Pleasant, West Virginia, on a quiet street named after infamous Australian author and Nazi sympathizer Tasman Forth, stands a monument to an American legend. I speak, of course, of the Mothman statue.
Behind me is the Mothman statue and marker. Created in 2003 by artist and sculptor Bob Roach on commission from Point Pleasant native Charles Humphreys, the statue commemorates a dark, mysterious, and fascinating piece of Point Pleasant history, a series of sightings of popular American cryptid, Mothman.
While those familiar with the history of Mothman may see good reason for many of the artistic choices made on the monument, one touch of flair is almost as much of a mystery as the Mothman himself.
This is the Mothman statue's ass. Created in 2003 by artist and sculptor Bob Roach on commission from Point Pleasant native Charles Humphreys, this stainless steel derriere commemorates the Mothman's ass.
Affectionately known as the Shiny Hiney by millions around the world, Mothman's No Rusty Dusty attracts visitors far and wide, who, much like the visitors to Ireland's famed Blarney Stone, make pilgrimage to Point Pleasant to kiss the chrome cryptid caboose. Except they do it with their hands. A hand kiss. Touch. That's the word. They touch it.
Cult following aside, the mystery remains. Why does this statue have such a formidable fanny? I'm He Who Is Steve, and I just drove 16 hours to dig deeper into Mothman's butt. Wait. I'm He Who Is Steve, and I've come to West Virginia to cast a light where the sun don't shine, on the bloody history of Point Pleasant, an explosives factory turned wildlife refuge, and the series of sightings in the 1960s that started it all, so we can finally answer the question, why? Seriously? Asshole.
Although American Indians inhabited the area of the Ohio River Valley, in which Point Pleasant sits, for thousands of years prior to the arrival of European colonists, few details are known of events in their history, as they had no known system of writing, because they held a strong cultural belief that books are for nerds. The known history of Point Pleasant that pertains to the Mothman begins with a series of conflicts known as Lord Dunmore's War. Following the effective end of the French and Indian War in 1760, France ceded their claims on all land east of the Mississippi River to Britain, and after the Royal Proclamation of 1763 by King George III, British colonists were allowed by British law to expand further west than ever before. Naturally, the peoples already inhabiting these lands did not generally enjoy the settlers encroaching on their homes, and while many interactions were peaceful, with negotiations and compromises being made by the Indians in several instances, the Indians were obviously not a single, unified governmental body, and many conflicts came to violence, which, for those unfamiliar, is like arguing, but with guns. In 1774, British colonial governor of Virginia and silly boy John Murray, the Earl of Dunmore, or just Lord Dunmore, decided he was fed up with the Ohio country Shawnee Indians defending their historical hunting grounds south of the Ohio River, and petitioned the House of Burgesses to send in the Virginia militia. War were declared, and Murray formed two separate armies, one led by Lord Dunmore himself. The other army was led by Andrew Lewis, who would ironically fight in the Continental Army against Lord Dunmore's forces just 2 years later during the American Revolutionary War, also known as No Tea Sunday Funday. Lewis established a military outpost where the Kanawha River feeds into the Ohio, and named it Camp Point Pleasant. Lord Dunmore's campaign against the Indians was brief, lasting only from May of 1774 until October of the same year, when the war was ended shortly after the bloody Battle of Point Pleasant, which was a decisive Virginian victory over the combined Shawnee and Mingo forces led by Hokoleskwa, also known as Cornstalk. Some consider the Battle of Point Pleasant, which took place 7 months before the battles of Lexington and Concord, the first battle of the American Revolution, although the idea remains unpopular among most historians, because it's wrong. After his defeat at Point Pleasant, Hokoleskwa advocated for the Shawnee to remain neutral in the Revolutionary War, even though many Shawnee saw the war as an opportunity to win back the lands that had been taken from them by the Americans. In 1777, in the interest of protecting his people, Cornstalk made a diplomatic visit to the newly constructed Fort Randolph, where the town of Point Pleasant would later stand. And he was imprisoned by the American commander along with 3 others, including Cornstalk's own son, Elenipsico. While the 4 were being held, an American soldier stationed at Fort Randolph was killed by Indians nearby. Cornstalk, his son, and the 2 other prisoners were brutally murdered in retaliation.
Hokoleskwa was originally buried at Fort Randolph, but his remains have been moved twice since, and now this small stone obelisk marks his grave at Two Indy Way State Park at the confluence of the Ohio and Kanawha rivers. Legend has it that Hokoleskwa uttered a curse as his dying words. Many believe that sightings of the Mothman, UFOs, Men in Black, an historic flood in 1937, and even the tragic, deadly collapse of the Silver Bridge are due to the lingering spell. While no historical document details the exact words of this curse, people who are me believe it went something like this.
You have murdered by my side, my young son. May the shadow of a great ass cover this land. May you who make your beds here never know peace from the clap of its cheeks. May your strength be sapped by its curves, and may you forever be paralyzed by its hypnotic wobble.
Yeah, something like that.
In 1942, the United States Army established the West Virginia Ordnance Works in an 8,320-acre site about 6 miles north of Point Pleasant. For the last 3 years of World War II, this facility was used by the Army to produce trinitrotoluene, or TNT. TNT is an explosive used in many military and commercial purposes like mining and blowing people up to death, respectively. TNT became popular as an explosive largely because of its low impact sensitivity, making it easy and safe to transport and play football with. TNT is still used today by explosion scientists, or boomologists, as a standard equivalent to measure the yield of explosives and even the impact of meteors. That's why you hear people talk about nuclear bombs in terms of kilotons or megatons, because the yield of their explosions is equivalent to that many tons of TNT. The West Virginia Ordnance Works employed 3,500 people and was a multi-building facility, including 2 power plants, known as the South Power Plant and the North Power Plant, ammonia oxidation plants, sulfuric acid concentration buildings, staff offices, and even dormitories for the employees.
The explosives were sometimes stored on site, in structures affectionately called igloos. Around 100 of these igloos were built by the Army.
don't hear it, but there is a constant, reverberant echo in here. It's unlike I've ever heard. It's awesome.
Designed to withstand massive explosions from a potential Axis bombing and covered in earth to camouflage them from enemy spy planes, these structures stand to this day. After the war, West Virginia Ordnance Works was shuttered forever, and the land was sold off to various owners and purposes.
A 3,600-acre parcel of the land was gifted to the state of West Virginia on the condition that they use it as a wildlife area. Today, the lovely and peaceful nature refuge is officially known as the McClintock Wildlife Area, though some of the locals still refer to it as the old TNT Area.
This TNT area, and more specifically the abandoned North Power Plant building, became a focal point for the sightings of Mothman in the 1960s. But why? Sometimes beauty is only skin deep. Some of the old TNT area land was leased for biochemical studies, and extensive testing in the late 20th century revealed multiple contaminants in the soil and water of the defunct munitions facility. A report from the Environmental Protection Agency on the area details the results of the testing as follows.
Groundwater, seepage, soils, and the surface water on site are contaminated with explosive nitroaromatic compounds including TNT, trinitrobenzene, and dinitrotoluene, with former site operations as well as metals including arsenic, lead, and beryllium. Visitors to the wildlife management area may be exposed to contaminants by direct contact with or accidental ingestion of contaminated surface water or soils. Get Steve. I read good. So smart.
A cleanup plan for the TNT area wasn't finalized by the EPA until the 1980s, nearly 20 years after the initial sightings of the Mothman. Could these contaminants have somehow caused a sort of collective hallucination in the area? Or, worse yet, could the chemicals in the soil and water in the McClintock Wildlife Area have attracted the attention of extraterrestrial beings or cryptozoological creatures, or perhaps even mutated local animals into something new?
Something hideous, horrific, and otherwise unexplainable with a big ol' yellow Tonka truck booty? What are you drinking? TNT juice? High noon. It's not TNT juice.
Major cleanup efforts in the TNT area began in the 1990s, and the North Power Plant was demolished by 1995. The cleanup efforts are ongoing, and the site continues to implement a long-term monitoring system put in place by the EPA. On what she would later describe in an interview as a clear, cold night in November of 1966, Point Pleasant area resident Linda Scarberry was with her husband Roger and another married couple, Steve and Mary Mallett. The four decided to have some fun by going for a night drive through the TNT area. They found themselves by the North Power Plant and witnessed something unexplainably thick. The following description of that fateful night is from a witness statement made by Linda Scarberry just a few days after the initial sighting, and later published in the book Mothman: The Facts Behind the Legend. Names other than Linda's were redacted in that publication to protect the privacy of those individuals, and are maintained here for the same reason.
We were riding through the TNT area on a side road by the old powerhouse building around 12 on Tuesday night, November 15th, 1966, when we came over this small rise in the road. All at once, yelled for us to look at that thing in the road. I looked up and saw it throw it in a circle at the old powerhouse. It didn't run, but it wobbled baby, wobbled baby, wobbled baby like it couldn't keep its balance. Its cheeks were just spread just a little. We sat there for a few seconds, then took off. I kept yelling for him to hurry. We didn't even stop for its luscious curves.
But the fateful night was far from finished for the unfortunate foursome.
We got out on Route 62 and was coming down the road, and that thing was sitting on the second hill when you come into the first bad curves. As soon as our lights hit it, it was gone. It spread its cheeks a little and went straight up into the air. When we got to the armory, it was flying over our car. We were going between 100 and 105 miles per hour down that straight stretch, and that ass was just popping up and down on the back end of our car. And as we got there in front of the lights by the resort, it dived at our car and went away. I could hear the cheeks clapping as if to get more speed as it went up. We were all terrified and kept yelling for to go faster. As we came into that straight stretch by C.C. Lewis, the thing was over our car again. Then it disappeared as we came into the lights by C.C. Lewis gates.
After seeing the Mothman once more after C.C. Lewis's gate, the witnesses decided to involve the local police. According to Linda Scarberry, the police followed them in a brief search for the creature, but to no avail. The Mason County Sheriff would later speak to the Point Pleasant Register newspaper of how the young couples appeared terrified when they came to him that cool November night. To quote the Register, the youths had
seen something unusual scare them.
He theorized it may have been an
oversized shy poke, possibly a freak of nature. The way they were talking about that thing, you'd swear it had a 30-foot gooseneck trailer full of cantaloupes for an ass.
The newspaper adds a note. This bird is also known as a shagpoke, and actually is a large bird with spindly legs, long wing spread, webbed feet, a butt positively bursting out of its feathers, and lives around water, and makes a raucous noise, they say. Sheriff Johnson was certainly not wrong about at least a part of the two couples' experience. The four had certainly seen something strange and terrifying. But was their harrowing experience as easy to explain away as an enormous and well-endowed bird? The youngsters may have been scared. They may have even been startled. But as many might agree, while fear is a powerful motivator, it pales in comparison to the human thirst for knowledge and certainty. As Steve Mallett was quoted in the Point Pleasant Register the morning following the encounter,
"This doesn't have an explanation to it. It was an animal, but nothing like I'd ever seen before."
Then, when asked if they were going back to look for the creature,
"Yes, this afternoon and again tonight. And if you'd seen the pooper on that thing, you'd be coming with me."
in return they did. In the written statements collected by Linda Scarberry, the witnesses claimed to have found unusual tracks on the ground about the shut-down power station. Tracks Scarberry herself would describe as like two great big watermelons put together, but smooth. Undeterred, they proceeded toward the abandoned building. One of the original witnesses went into the boiler area of the plant alone and came running out pale and frightened, screaming for someone else. The witness advised they had seen the creature inside one of the large power plant boilers, and indeed, when several area journalists eager for a scoop, or two, on the talk of Point Pleasant returned with some of the witnesses 2 days after the first sighting, a loud clanging noise was reported from inside the boilers, and the door the same witness who'd seen the creature said he'd closed was wide open. Newspapers across the region and the country reported on the Mothman sightings. Some newspapers managed to maintain a neutral, or at least scientifically skeptical, point of view. Some posited that the sightings were easily explained by those with sufficient zoological knowledge, such as Robert L. Smith, at the time an associate professor of wildlife management at West Virginia University, in his weekly column in the Morgantown Dominion Post.
This week, I'm going to write about the sandhill crane, simply to set the record straight about the monster bird that made the headline in Mason County. Much of the information has been misinterpreted, added to, subtracted, and changed with the telling. There is no doubt in my mind that the strange monster, or large terrifying bird, or what have you, was a sandhill crane. The identification was rather easy from the descriptions of the bird in the news releases. The sandhill crane is a large bird, standing 4 to 4.5 feet tall. Its stance is rather erect, and it walks with a strong, deliberate stride on its meaty, voluminous thighs and buxom yet muscular tail that, seen in the dark, might vaguely suggest a human buttocks. Under the glare of headlights, the reflection of the eyes and roundish red patches on the head would leave the impression of 2 large red eyes. Startled, the bird might have initiated its mating behavior, which could account for the description of the creature throwing it in a circle.
Not all reports were as professional, however, and many resorted to petty ridicule of the witnesses. Disillusioned and hurt by the treatment of her and her husband by her neighbors in the media, Mary Mallet had simply this to say in the Athens Messenger on November 18th of 1966.
I hope others do see it. I hope that ass scares them as much as it did us. A terrifying, gigantic ass. Fluttering so viciously. Maybe then they'll believe the thing exists, and we're not dreaming.
And see the Mothman many others certainly claim to. For the next year, anywhere from dozens to hundreds of people reported seeing the Mothman, along with UFO sightings, men in black, and even close encounters with a possibly extraterrestrial being who identified himself as Indrid Cold. And while initially the sightings may have been a passing fad, a mere footnote relegated to the more curious annals of American history, the cryptid would gain a slow and steady cult following over the next half-century, and indeed Mothman may be more popular today than ever. Movies, novels, art, investigations abound, sure.
But the statue behind me and the magnificent behind on the statue behind me are, to me, more than enough proof of that. If you're still watching and you came looking for a laugh or a smile, I hope you got it. And this is where that part of the video ends. If you'd indulge me with just a couple more minutes of your time, I'd like to give some aspects of this story the more serious tone they deserve. If that seems a bit too heavy for you today, I understand, and thank you for watching this far. I will see you next time. For the rest of us, here we go.
Almost all of the sightings of Mothman came to an abrupt halt on December 15, 1967. Exactly 13 months to the day after the encounter with the creature by the Scarberries and Mallets, the Silver Bridge, which spanned the Ohio River between Point Pleasant and Gallipolis, Ohio, suddenly and violently collapsed. 32 vehicles fell into the depths of the Ohio, and 46 people lost their lives in the disaster. Perhaps, as some assert, the mysterious but benevolent Mothman had done all it could to warn the citizens of Point Pleasant of the impending disaster and moved on to the next endangered population. Or perhaps the town, once captivated by an exciting, terrifying, and inarguably attention-grabbing phenomenon, now had more pressing matters to attend to in the grieving of their loved ones. Either way, the Mothman of Point Pleasant was scarcely seen after the tragedy. A 1993 issue of the Journal of the American Society of Civil Engineers lists the cause of the collapse as the failure of a single link in one of the suspending I-bar chains, a tiny manufacturing flaw that, through a process called stress erosion cracking, grew over the life of the bridge into a crack only 2.5 millimeters deep, caused the link bar to fail suddenly, setting off a catastrophic chain reaction which caused the collapse of the bridge. The unusual design of the bridge, which consisted of metal bars in a linked chain forming the suspension portion of the structure, rather than the more common spun cable design, made it so that once the link failed, a catastrophic collapse was the only possible outcome. To make things worse, there may have been no reasonable way to prevent this failure. According to a 2001 article on the collapse in the Journal of the West Virginia Historical Society, it would have been literally impossible to spot the manufacturing flaw without completely disassembling the bar, as inspection tools at the time were simply incapable of showing such defects. If you're a person who believes in fate, it would be easy to see this tragedy as meant to be. If you're a person who believes in conspiracies of bad actors, it wouldn't be too much of a task to make this fit either. Take Linda Scarberry, who maintained for decades that the collapse was the result of meddling by the enigmatic men in black spotted in the region, who would show up at the homes of UFO and Mothman witnesses to threaten them into silence. For the more skeptical among us, it may be easy to laugh at such claims and dismiss them as the rants of a disturbed woman, or worse, a grifter looking for attention. But I'd like to offer a different perspective. We all carry our demons with us, in one form or another. Many of the witnesses of Mothman in the 1960s guarded their privacy closely in the years to follow, refusing to take interviews or make appearances in any media surrounding the sightings for reasons ultimately only they know. Reading this quote from Donnie Sargent Jr.'s interview with Linda Scarberry, it's not hard to see why. None of us have ever been the same after the first sighting. I still look over my shoulder. I feel like there's something behind me or in the room with me. I still dream about it after 35 years. It's really hard to talk about it because a lot of people don't believe it. All the other reports and news crews have made us out to be a bunch of kids that were drunk or on drugs up there that night. The police know that's not true, and so do we. Imagine you're driving with your friends in the dead of night, and you see something so strange and terrifying that you drive over 100 miles an hour down a narrow, unlit road to get away from it. You don't know what it was, but you know you saw something. Something that keeps you up at night, and, though you don't know it yet, will give you nightmares for decades to come. You call the police, talk to the media. Other people see this thing and confirm it. Nobody knows exactly what it is, but they all know they saw something. Those initial folks are receptive, take you seriously, as do some others down the line. But most, they just make fun of you. They call you a drunk. They call you a liar. They call you crazy. Would you ever tell the truth about what you saw ever again? Am I asking y'all to just believe in the Mothman? No. Y'all, I'm a man to which interest and fascination comes easily, but to which belief comes very, very hard. Am I asking you not to call out proven liars or grifters, or to not take the things you're given with a healthy dose of skepticism? Absolutely not. I think most things should be taken with a grain of salt, and you should always consider the source. But I would ask of you, in your daily interactions with your fellow human beings, to treat people with respect, dignity, and to be understanding of others' troubles, to be kind, to comfort those who are scared, and to, at the very least, listen to their truth, even if it's sometimes hard to swallow. Before I go, I'd like to thank my voice contributors, Jenna, Alex, Tim, Philip, Tristan, Dennis, and Rob. All those people have their own content and projects you can enjoy, many of which I'm a part of. Links in the description. I'd like to thank my own very special Mothman. You know who you are. Thank you to the owners of Fraser's Cabin, my home away from home while I film this video. Just a few minutes drive from downtown Point Pleasant and the TNT area. If you'd like to stay there, link in the description. If you'd like to learn more about the original sources surrounding the Mothman sightings at Point Pleasant, I recommend the book Mothman: The Facts Behind the Legend by Donnie Sargent Jr. and Jeff Wamsley. It's a great source of interviews, information, and primary documents from the encounters. Amazon link in the description. Take care, y'all, and be kind.